Hey everybody, it's DJ. As we begin to look at my final project, my main goal in my mind when starting out with this project was bridging the gap in a blended learning environment. What I mean by that is I've noticed that engagement factors really tend to fall off outside of the classroom when the students have to do independent work. And I wanted to find a way to bridge that, make it not only more engaging for the students, but also, get the students to actually want to do it. And enjoy it. So let's take a look. So the context, I'm a 7th and 8th grade social studies teacher. I'm currently teaching a blended learning environment, so portion of the class online, portion of the class independently. And I work with inner city students in an urban area in Albany, Gibb Tech Valley. And again, the main problem I'm seeing is the students' learning is taking place while we are online together. It's when I give the students that extra 40 minutes worth of work where not only does the engagement fall off, but the actual participation falls off as well. So I wanted to try to bridge that gap between the two. Some of the theories I use. So obviously, for designing like an online space like this, I definitely started with backwards design. So for this unit and project, I began with backwards planning, and I attempted to create a constructivist approach for learning, where the students are really taking like a hands-on approach and learning by doing rather than, here's the work, memorize it. This ensures that the activities, exit tickets, everything has to align directly back to the overall goal. Not only does it have to align back to my overall lesson learning objectives, but it also has to, each activity has to involve the students, diving deeper into the material rather than me just presenting the material. Linder discusses this and emphasizes this when he states that many online educators focus primarily on the content rather than the component of the course design. So again, I tried to take a more holistic look and work backwards from my overall goal. Continuing with theories, by introducing the material in a VR space opposed to the learning management system, I'm allowing the students to have that hands-on approach that I had previously mentioned, and it makes it much more experiential. So I feel like a VR space allows the students to be almost immersed in that virtual classroom, as you're going to see it in a few minutes, and it becomes more of an experience. And by having it like this, I want the students to think of it less as learning and more of just, almost like a game, especially with my 7th and 8th grade students. Video games are huge, so if they think of it more as a game and more of a space that's individual to my class, it might be more engaging for them. Bates discusses the theory of experiential learning as well as constructivist when he says that the purpose of this is so that the students can construct knowledge rather than simply acquire it or memorize it. So again, I want the students to go in. I want the students to be fully immersed and exposed in the sources and materials that I'm giving them rather than listening to me talk about it in a direct instruction approach. So the methods, obviously the overall unit, I didn't mention this, was World War I, and I created a VR space that provides resources and materials that the students should use when they're completing their outside of the classroom component, which includes notes, homework, and exit tickets. So primarily it will bridge the gap from what I previously taught them in the first half of class, where they're going to be immersed in these resources, and use them not only to help them with notes, homework, and exit tickets, but also gearing towards their final project. So the entire VR space could be construed as a project-based learning, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. Again, I wanted them to engage in a fun and interesting way. When viewing the University of Wisconsin's teaching with technology, it states that blending environment point to a more active classroom, and really that's what I want this at-home portion to be, is an active, interactive space where, let's say two students want to go into the classroom together. They can talk about the material. It creates like almost this community of practice within itself where, I'm also helping the students to re-socialize. I think that with this area of COVID, socialization has definitely gone down. So this space could also serve as that as well. So it's a little bit twofold purpose. At the end of the unit of study, after all of the resources, the students are going to use all of those resources, and they're going to create a rafting letter. as if they were a World War I soldier in the trenches. So again, this is where I redesigned it, the student learning goals, and I rethought about. I basically thought with the end in mind is a good way of me saying it. So for those of you who don't know what a rafting letter is, or a raft, excuse me, it's when students will assume the role, they'll write, it's a specific format of writing where they assume a different role, they're writing to a different audience, the format, and a topic. So they are going to actually use the resources provided within the VR space to create a rafting letter, as if they were a World War I soldier fighting from the trenches. Again, here's the rubric. The rubric will be provided in both the beginning and, within the VR space. So prior to the 6 days, World War I is going to take me about 6 days. For each of those 6 days, there's a corresponding component in the VR space. So let's say I'm talking about how the U.S. got involved in World War I. I teach the mini lesson in the beginning. At home, the students go to the VR space. They go to the portion about how the United States got involved. Or maybe it's World War I propaganda. There's a component on that. Questions will be linked into their LMS. They will use the sources within the VR space to answer those questions. At the end of the 6 days, they're going to have to spend an entire day writing a letter, right, as a final project, their formative assessment. They're going to use bits and pieces of all of the resources to show mastery of not only World War I in general, but all of the key individual components. So why was the U.S. involved? What were the alliances? So on and so forth. So they're going to use bits and pieces from each one to show mastery of not only World War I, but mastery of, boom, why was the U.S. involved? What were the new technologies? So on and so forth. So the design, again, with the VR space was designed for learning. And by this, I constantly looked at the material within the space, and I tried to ensure that there was no gap between what I was having the students do and the class objective. So I tried to basically get rid of all that gray area that could be, leave room for confusion on the students. And I wanted them to simply I wanted direct alignment between my activities and the end goal, which was the the mastery of the rafting letter. So again, the strategies, we discussed the rafting assessment, and that letter includes details that demonstrate mastery of all of the mini lessons that are taking place within the unit. And then the rubrics will be introduced prior to starting all of it. It will be also linked into the VR space, as you're going to see in a few moments, and that way for each mini lesson they're also knowing what components of that mini lesson they need to master and demonstrate that mastery on their rafting assignment. All right, so let's take a look at my project. So as you can see, I have my little virtual classroom here. Mr. LeBlanc's classroom, contact information. And then, so over here is the rubric. It also has the rubric and the directions, actually. So everything is clearly labeled for the students. Directions, rubric, and again, they could just pull it up if they wanted to. And they can zoom in, interact with that document, look at it, so on and so forth. So what is it like to be living in the trenches? Here's a trench lesson. You have materials for causes for World War I. You can open that link up and see it. U.S. involvement in World War I. Everything is clearly labeled. As we're working our way around the room, we see the alliances, trenches, all supplemental material that could also help them. So basically, there should be no searches for everything because I'm providing them with everything. Here's what I call the propaganda wall. So this shows multiple examples of U.S. propaganda. Students can click on it, interact, and view with all of the different materials. And then again, supplemental materials. So each day there will be a component that corresponds with the mini lesson. They will come here. They will use the material together or independently, however that seems to work best. But there it is. There's my virtual VR space. That's supposed to be a community for my students to use. Each of these are going to be, almost scaffolded, where they're going to take bits and pieces of each of these resources to write in their letter, and their letter will be housed in just submitted the LMS. All right. Thank you, and here are my sources.